Since the invention of the internet, life changed for most people. It reached a point where almost everyone I knew wanted a computer. We finally joined the computer generation a couple of years ago and decided to buy one. At the beginning, it was the new toy in the house. Deb, my wife, used it for emailing and games. The kids, Kyle and Kayla, used it for games and some homework assignments. I used it to search the web and look for interesting content. That's what I did with a lot of my late nights after work. I worked the second shift and got off work from the factory at midnight. I didn't want to go to the bars like a lot of the guys. After all, I was married, so I always headed home. Everyone was sleeping, so I went on the computer. After a while, the excitement wore off. I didn't become addicted like some people. Instead, I found myself reading stories online. Fiction, non-fiction, you name it. I couldn't believe most of what I was reading. Did people really live like that, or was it just imagination? I got caught up in stories about unfaithful wives. All these women cheating on their husbands. It was hard to believe, but it did get inside my head. I started watching my wife's actions more closely. When we were out, I'd mention to her about dancing too close to someone or being too nice to a guy. We argued about it sometimes. I knew she was a good-looking woman, but I had no real reason to distrust her. Still, I found myself looking through the laundry or checking her emails, doing ridiculous things driven by the stories I'd read. I even started reading less, but the thoughts stayed with me. I'd read stories where men found their wives with another man and just stood there watching. I had to ask myself, would that ever be a turn-on? But with my jealous nature, I knew it wouldn't be for me. I shared these thoughts with Deb, and she asked me why I would even think that way. She didn't want anyone but me. I met Deb when we were in our 20s at her sister's wedding. We danced and became good friends. She was a school teacher, and I worked at a factory. A year after we started dating, we got married. The next year, Kyle was born, and 2 years after that, Kayla came along. Deb's sister, Sandy, was a bit of a wild one. Back in school, I'd known her for years. We didn't date, but she was pretty free-spirited and didn't shy away from attention. As far as I knew, nearly every guy on our football team had been with her. I shouldn't judge because I had my wild days too. I was part of a few after-game parties where things got a little out of hand, but no one was forced into anything. Sandy had been involved in those more than once along with a girlfriend of hers. They were both pretty carefree when it came to that sort of thing. Sandy eventually married Bob, a supervisor from my plant. Though he was later transferred to another location, he had a similar wild streak, so it wasn't a big surprise when they ended up together. I never cared for Bob, though, and liked him even less when I thought he was hitting on Deb after we were married. Deb insisted he was just being nice since we were now family, but I felt differently. I told her if he ever tried anything, I'd make sure he regretted it. She just laughed and said I was overreacting. She was mine and only mine. Deb and I had agreed not to talk about our past relationships, mostly because we were both pretty jealous. I didn't want to be out somewhere and run into a guy she'd mentioned being involved with. Likewise, I didn't want to have to explain that I'd once been with her sister when Kyle was 8 and Kayla was 6. Things were going fairly well between Deb and me, despite the usual arguments every couple has. The one issue was that we didn't see enough of each other, working on opposite shifts. I was alone during the day, and she was alone with the kids at night. It wasn't ideal, but it was the way things were. One day, as Deb was getting ready for work, she asked if I could stop by her sister's place to fix her kitchen sink. It was leaking, and Bob, not being the handiest guy, couldn't manage it. I laughed when she mentioned plumbing, and she quickly clarified. The sink's plumbing, not my sister's. If you ever try fixing hers, you'll be sorry. We both laughed, and I promised to stop by before heading to work. She kissed me goodbye and headed out with the kids for school. I couldn't help but think about Sandy. From what Bob had told me, I suspected they were probably swingers. They didn't have any kids because Sandy always said it would ruin her figure. She did have a nice figure, but it wasn't any better than Deb's, and Deb had 2 kids. Sandy had always tried to flirt with me, but I did my best to keep things light and harmless. She looked good, sure, but nothing was worth risking my marriage over. I remember her once telling me that someday something would happen between us, but I never took it seriously. Sandy worked part-time as a cashier at one of the local grocery stores and had the day off when I stopped by to fix her plumbing. When I got there, she was wearing a robe that seemed a bit too casual for company. She offered me a cup of coffee, and we chatted for a few minutes before she showed me the sink. It was just clogged, nothing major, and I wondered why Bob hadn't fixed it himself. I cleared out the space under the sink to take apart the trap, and found it was clogged with food scraps like eggshells and potato peels. As I was lying under the sink fixing the pipes, I noticed Sandy standing nearby. Not in a way that seemed entirely innocent. She wasn't wearing anything under her robe, and it became clear that she was trying to provoke something. She made a comment insinuating something more, but I told her to stop and let me finish the job. She backed away briefly, but it was obvious she wasn't giving up. After I finished fixing the sink and stood up, Sandy tried again more directly. She asked if I was going to give in to her advances, reminding me of something from high school. I cut her off, telling her I couldn't do it. I loved Deb, her sister, and wouldn't betray her. Sandy was persistent, even threatening to tell Deb that something had happened, whether it was true or not. I was in shock, trying to wrap my head around why she would want to hurt us like that. She just laughed, dismissing my concern, realizing the situation was only going to get worse if I stayed. I grabbed my tools and told Sandy I was done. I left quickly, my mind racing with the possibility that she might lie to Deb. When I got to work, I tried calling Deb, but she wasn't home yet, so I left a message. Deb, I love you. I need to tell you something about your sister when I get home tonight. I tried to focus on my job, but my mind kept drifting back to the whole situation. Later, I called home again, but there was still no answer. Growing more anxious, I called Deb's mom, who told me that Deb had gone out with Sandy and Bob, and that she was watching the kids. She assured me everything seemed fine, and that Deb had planned to pick up the kids later. It was the longest night of my life. I knew I had to tell Deb the truth about what had happened between me and Sandy back in high school, even though it was long before I had ever met Deb. I was certain she would understand, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When my shift finally ended, I drove home only to find Deb's car in the driveway. I took a deep breath and went inside, prepared to face whatever was coming. What I walked into was far worse than I could have imagined. In the living room, my wife was sitting on the couch with Sandy beside her, holding her hand. Bob was standing, pulling up his pants, and Deb looked disoriented, like she'd had too much to drink. The whole scene made my blood boil. Sandy was smirking, and Bob had a smug grin on his face. Deb looked confused and scared. I lost it. I didn't feel anything but pure anger as I charged at Bob and started hitting him. I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted to hurt him for what he'd done. There was screaming behind me. I couldn't tell if it was Deb or Sandy, but I didn't stop until I felt a sharp pain on the back of my head, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. There was a police officer in the room with me. "You're awake," he said. "I'm Patrolman Jen Andrews. You're in the hospital because you have a concussion from being hit over the head. There was a fight at your house, and the police were called. You were going to be charged with assault, but the charges have been dropped. You're a very lucky man. You could have gone to prison for as much as 18 months. "What about the assault on me?" I asked. "You said someone hit you over the head. According to witnesses, you came home and started a fight with your brother-in-law. In order to stop you, his wife hit you over the head with a vase. You were only hit once, and it was to break up the fight. You should thank them for dropping the charges. Where was my wife when you got there? When we arrived, your wife was unwell. Your sister-in-law said she had too much to drink. When you got mad at her and moved toward her, your brother-in-law intervened, And that's when the fight started. He was just trying to protect himself. Your wife told us she could hardly remember anything except you yelling at her. If the charges were dropped, why are you here? My supervisor called while you were still out and told me to wait for your statement. So what happened? I have nothing to say. I wasn't about to tell the world that I caught my wife with another man. I just laid there and said nothing. Okay then, have it your way. According to the doctor, you'll need to stay here until tomorrow. I suggest you think about what happened and be thankful no charges were filed. You're a very lucky man, Mr. Harper. The officer left, and I lay there with a terrible headache, unsure of what to do next. I knew I couldn't stay with a wife who had betrayed me, but I had to understand why she did it. I called my sister, Amy, to come pick me up the next morning. I didn't have a way to get home, and I certainly didn't want Deb picking me up. While waiting for Amy, the phone rang. It was Deb. Do you want me to come and pick you up? We need to talk now that we're even. Even? What the hell are you talking about? You slept with Bob, and now we're even. I have Annie coming to pick me up. I'm just going to grab some of my things, and I'll be leaving. What do you mean leaving? I just got even with you for what you did. Deb replied, I'm not discussing this over the phone. Amy and I will be by to pick up my things, and we'll talk then. I hung up and waited for Amy. She showed up a few minutes later, and we headed to my house. I asked Amy to wait in the car. She liked Deb, and I didn't want her caught in the middle. I knocked on the door, and Deb opened it. I asked, where are the kids? She said, they're still at her mom's. I spoke first. Did you get my phone message? Yes, she said, and Sandy told me how you forced yourself on her. How could you do that? Her voice was trembling. I didn't know such a thing. That's why I left the message. I went to Sandy's to fix her plumbing. She made advances, but I said no. She kept pushing and finally threatened to tell you that something happened between us, even though it didn't. I don't believe you. You're lying. Why would my sister lie to me? Deb was crying now. She's jealous of our marriage. She wanted to see if she could break us up, and it looks like she succeeded. Why do you think she sat by while Bob got involved? They're swingers, Deb. They wanted to bring you into their world, and it worked. You let Bob sleep with you, and now our marriage is over. No, it's not true. I did it to get even with you. You hurt my sister and me. I was trying to make things right. Sandy knew intimate details about you. She described things only someone who had been with you could know. Sandy's a liar. The only reason she knows anything about me is because of something that happened between us in high school. Yes, I slept with her back then, but it was long before I ever met you. I didn't tell you because it was in the past. I fell in love with you, Deb, and I didn't want to lose you. I don't know what to believe anymore, Deb said, her voice breaking. Sandy may be your sister, but I'm your husband. Instead of trusting me, you let Bob come between us. You didn't even ask me for the truth. I thought. No, you didn't think. If you truly believed I assaulted your sister, why didn't she call the cops? Sandy said she didn't want to create a family scandal. She had no problem hitting me over the head and calling the police last night. You can believe whatever you want, but this marriage is over. If I really did what she says, why would you want to stay with me? I didn't want this. I love you, Deb, I sobbed. Love, she replied. You better take a good look at what that word means because it doesn't involve doing what you did. I'm going to grab a few of my things and be gone. I'll come back for the rest when you're not home. I'll see a lawyer on Monday and get the divorce started. Ray, wait. This isn't how it was supposed to happen, Sandy said. She forgave you, and you'd forgive me. I was just trying to get even with you. No, Deb, you were just getting involved with Bob and your sister's lies. I went and grabbed a suitcase, packing a few personal things into it. What am I supposed to tell the kids? Tell them whatever you want. Tell them I hurt your sister and that you betrayed me. I don't care. I don't want to see you again. I'll set up visitation with the lawyer, and Amy can bring the kids for me to see. I don't ever want to speak to you again." I opened the door and walked out. Amy took me to a cheap motel until I could find another place to stay. On the way there, I told Amy the whole story. She was my sister and best friend, and she knew I was telling the truth. I trusted her to help keep an eye on Deb and the kids. The weeks that followed were tough. I worked as much overtime as possible since my expenses had gone up. I found a cheap boarding house, renting it by the week. Most of my meals were at the bar or a diner nearby. I met with a lawyer, and since I had no proof of anything, I requested a dissolution of the marriage. He told me that Deb didn't want the divorce, but would go along with whatever I decided. Everything was divided fairly evenly. We were renting the house, so she took over the payments. Our savings were split down the middle, and she had to give me half of the value of our belongings. I was ordered to pay child support, which I didn't mind. I loved my kids and missed them terribly. The hardest part was that I also missed Deb, but I knew we were over. I attended as many school events as I could without interfering with work. Both of the kids had birthday parties, and I went to those as long as I didn't have to be around Deb's family. I kept conversations with Deb Sybil, but if she ever tried to talk about us, I would walk away. I saw the kids every other weekend, and occasionally during the week, depending on my schedule. Deb must have called me almost every day leading up to the divorce. If it was about the kids or the household, I'd listen, but the moment she tried to talk about us, I'd hang up. One day, I stopped by Amy for dinner and played with the kids. Amy told me Sandy was still sticking by her story. Deb was torn between what Sandy said and what I had told her. I explained to Amy that I had no proof, and neither did Sandy. It was just my word against hers, and Deb chose to believe her sister. That hurt more than anything. One afternoon, while I was at my apartment, the phone rang. It was the school. Kyle wasn't feeling well, and they asked if I could pick him up. Of course, I agreed. When I got there, he had a cold and was coughing. I called Deb to let her know I had picked him up. She said she'd come home as soon as she could. I took Kyle home, put him to bed, and checked his temperature. He had a slight fever, but nothing too bad. An hour later, Deb came home with Kayla. She went straight in to check on Kyle. While she was doing that, the phone rang, and I answered it out of habit. It was Sandy. "What are you doing there?" she asked. "Well, if it isn't the one who started all this. Kyle is sick, and I brought him home. Don't worry, you've already broken up this marriage." I reached down and pressed the record button on the answering machine, which recorded both sides of the conversation. "Is he okay? Why do you care? You're the reason his parents split up. Why would you worry about him? Listen, things got out of hand. You knew Bob was interested in Deb. If you had just listened to me, none of this would have happened. But no, you came home and started fighting. You accused me of lying, and now everything is ruined. But here's the thing, you can't prove anything. I told you from the start that Deb would believe me over you. Now you know." I stayed quiet for a moment before responding. "You caused all of this, and Deb chose to believe you. But the truth is, I'll never forgive you for what you've done to my family." She hung up, and I turned off the recorder. When Deb came out, she asked, "Who called?" "Your wonderful sister, the one you never believed would lie to you." "What did she want?" "She said you should call her back." I looked at Deb and added, "I guess I'll see you in court on Thursday. Don't forget to listen to that message." I walked out to my truck, and a few minutes later, my phone started ringing nonstop. Deb must have called me 10 times before I got home. When I finally answered, she was crying on the other end. "Ray, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I just talked to Sandy, and she admitted that she lied about everything." "Well, it's good to hear the truth finally, but it doesn't change anything. You didn't trust me when it mattered. You let someone else ruin what we had, and now it's too late. I love you and probably always will, but I also hate you for what you did to our family and the lack of trust you had in me." On Thursday, I took the next 2 days off work. I went to my lawyer's office and signed the dissolution papers. I wanted to be gone before Deb arrived. Feeling depressed, I headed over to the neighborhood bar. I was drinking heavily when I noticed Bob come in. He didn't see me as I approached him from the side, and I punched him hard. He went down, and I hit him again and again. I stood up and started kicking him while he lay on the floor. 3 guys eventually pulled me off him. I remember shouting, "You son of a witch! I'll hurt you for what you did to my family. I hope you get it." I continued kicking him until they dragged me away. The police arrived, handcuffed me, and took me to jail. This time, it was serious. I was allowed 1 phone call, and I called my sister, Amy. I told her what had happened and that she wasn't to post bail, as it would be too expensive. I planned to serve my sentence. She cried as I hung up the phone. Debbie came to the jail to see me, but I refused to see her. It was nearly 2 months before my case went to court. I was charged with assault and pleaded guilty. I received a 2-year sentence minus time served. I told Amy to pack up my belongings and store them in her basement. She mentioned that Deb was really feeling guilty and wanted to see me, but I told her I didn't want to see Deb. "I know you don't want to hear this," Amy said, "but Deb really loves you. Her whole family is angry about what Sandy said. Something else you should know. Debbie never signed the divorce papers. You're going to prison. A married man." Prison was a different world, not the kind of place you'd ever want to live. Fights were frequent, and I had to prove myself constantly. I wasn't anyone's target, but I still found myself in the infirmary twice during my first 2 months due to cuts from the fights. Over time, things calmed down as people left me alone. My cellmate was a lifer named Killer. He had gone home one day, found his wife with another man, and in a fit of rage, attacked them both. According to the papers, he had stabbed them upwards of 80 times. Killer was tough to get to know. He even killed another inmate the year before during a fight. I tried to keep to myself, but trouble always found me. After a while, though, even Killer started talking to me. One visiting day, I went to see who had come to visit. I thought it would be Amy or my dad, but it was Deb. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She looked so nice, so put together. For a moment, I wished I could hug her, but I played it cold. "I love you," I said. "I made a lot of mistakes. I brought some pictures from the kids. They miss you, and so do I." Tears streamed down her face. "Look, I have a new life now. Just take care of my kids and tell them I love them." She handed me the photos, their latest school pictures, and they looked so cute. "I didn't sign the divorce papers. I'll wait for you no matter how long it takes. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I believe we can get past it if you still love me." I didn't know what to say. Of course, I still loved her, but I hated what she had done and how she hadn't believed me. Without another word, I stood up and walked back to my cell, leaving her behind at the window without looking back. I worked in the prison kitchen and overheard some inmates talking about a plan to go after Killer. Apparently, it was revenge for him killing one of their friends. They planned to corner him in the lunchroom the next evening. I didn't want to be part of any groups, but I couldn't let this man die. I decided to tell Killer. When I told him, he wasn't sure whether to believe me. "You can believe what you want," I said. "I didn't tell the guards, and I'm taking a big chance telling you." Killer stared into my eyes for a long moment. "You can tell a lot about a man by looking into his eyes," he said before warning me to stay away from him. The next day, he had his own plan. I couldn't believe what he did. He put 2 thin hardcover books under his shirt, protecting his kidneys. 3 of his group sat behind him at another table, keeping watch. When the attacker came up and tried to stab him, the knife hit the books instead. The shiv was too dull to go through the books, and Killer's friends grabbed the guy and started beating him until the guards intervened. The attacker was sent to solitary, and Killer sat back down calmly, finishing his meal as if nothing had happened. After that, Killer and I talked more regularly inside our cell. He was a different person, much more open. But outside, He remained the hard-nosed leader of his group. He asked me about Deb and the kids. He told me he had 3 grown-up kids of his own. But of course, they never came to see him since he killed their mother. His youngest daughter, Angie, was the only one on his side. She knew that her mother had caused the family's problems, and she wrote to him regularly, but he told her not to visit. He didn't want to risk her being exposed to the prison environment. I could tell he truly loved his daughter, as he smiled when he mentioned that she had become a lawyer. I opened up to him about my own miserable situation, explaining how Sandy had set me up and caused trouble between me and Deb. "Do you still love her?" Killer asked. "Yes, I think so, but at the same time, I hate what she did to our family," I replied. "And does she still love you?" he asked. "She says she does, but I can't forgive her." "Why not? Look where you are now. You've hit rock bottom. If there was a woman out there who loved me and said she'd wait for me, I'd be the happiest man alive. But what about the distrust, not believing me, and being with another man?" I said, "You killed the man and your wife for the same thing, and I regret it every day of my life." He responded, "I wish I'd given her a second chance and had my family back." "Don't carry that grudge. It'll eat you away." You slowly but surely, boy, did he give me something to think about. Was he right? What would I do when I got out? I had no job, no future, and right now, no family. The following month, Deb came to visit again. She smiled at me with tears in her eyes. "The kids drew you some more pictures," she said, placing them in the tray. I looked at them, pictures of a dad, mom, and 2 kids. I guess the kids still saw us as a family. "They miss you." "God, I miss you. Will you ever be able to forgive me? Can we be a family again?" "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't talk to Sandy or Bob anymore after what happened. I'm so sorry for not trusting you." I thought to myself, she didn't believe me once, so the next time someone says something, will she believe them over me again? "Deb, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want to forgive you, but I don't know if I can. Seeing you with Bob, it's not something I can get out of my mind." "Did you really care about him?" "No, I hated it. That's why I threw up when you walked in. I saw the look on your face and I felt sick. I knew right then I'd made a terrible mistake trying to get even. I wish I could take it all back. I was so drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. There's only one man I want. And that's you, Ray, the father of our 2 kids." A couple of weeks later, Amy came to visit me. "Ray, remember I told you that Deb stopped seeing Sandy?" she said. "Well, I went by the house and saw Sandy and Bob going in. I don't know why they were there, so I kept driving. But I thought you should know." Now, I was confused again. Had Deb lied to me again? I was almost ready to forgive her and try to rebuild our life together. I knew Amy wouldn't lie to me, so I had to find out what was going on. About a month later, Killer and I were talking, and he told me he thought he owed me a favor for what I did for him. He mentioned that he had been a lawyer before prison and still had some connections. He was going to see if he could get me into an early release program. I didn't know whether to believe him, but he never lied to me before. It might sound strange to say this about someone like him, but I respected Killer. He had a way about him. His speech and presence demanded respect. I knew better than to ask too many questions, so I took him at his word. A few weeks later, I was called to the warden's office where a parole board meeting was taking place. The warden spoke first. "Mr. Harper, we have a petition for an early release hearing for you. I don't know who you know, but someone suggested we give you a chance. After reviewing your record, we see you had a rough time adjusting to prison in the beginning. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "I guess I wasn't cut out for prison life, but I tried to adjust. If you were released early, where would you live? And how would you support yourself?" I had to think quickly, knowing this was a crucial question. "Well, sir, my sister is my best friend, and she and her husband said I could live with them until I get back on my feet." "Are you married, Mr. Harper?" Yes, sir, but we were in the process of a divorce when I was sentenced. Right now, I'm not sure where we stand on that. We appreciate your honesty. We knew you were separated and wanted to see if you'd be truthful with us. As far as work goes, does your former employer have a job for you? Yes, sir. My boss said I was a good worker and to come see him when I get out. What are the chances of you returning to prison? It doesn't look good. When someone we release early ends up back inside. I promise, sir, I never want to see these prison walls again. Go back to your cell, Mr. Harper. We'll get back to you by the end of the month. Yes, sir, and thank you for considering me for early release. When I got back to my cell, Killer asked, "How did it go?" I told him everything and asked if he had anything to do with it. You never know, he said. But if you get released early, I'll expect a carton of cigarettes a week in my account, he laughed. A few days later, Deb was back and said that someone from the parole board had been by the house. Are you getting an early release? She asked. What did they want? What did they say? They asked how we got along and if I could live there. I said, feeling nervous, I told them we were separated, but I'd welcome you back. She replied a bit anxious. I changed the subject. You told me you stopped seeing Sandy. Have you been seeing her? She's my sister, Deb said. I don't see her often, though. I cut her off. And Bob, too. Have you seen him lately? I asked, watching her reaction. She looked uncomfortable. Why are you asking me these questions? You can't be trusted. You told me you wouldn't see Sandy, but she and Bob were at the house. Did something happen between you and Bob again? Is that why you're worried about my early release? Did you tell him that when I get out, I'm coming for him? And if you're involved with him again, I'll deal with you too. Deb jumped up and ran out of the visitor's room. At that moment, I was sure my suspicions were true. I was about to walk back into the same situation that had landed me here in the first place. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. I just wanted to put a scare into them. I called my sister, Amy, and she came down to see me. I told her about the conversation with Deb. She felt sorry for me and confirmed that the parole board had been by her place. She told them I could stay as long as I needed, and her husband, Kenny, said I was welcome there too. Do you know if they called Mr. Parker about my job? I asked. Yes, they did, she said. And he said you could have your old job back. You were one of their best workers. God, Amy, you've really got my hopes up. I just hope I don't get turned down. You won't, they said. Since you have a place to stay and a job lined up, you'll probably be released at the start of the month. She started crying. Amy was right. I got called up and told I was being released the following week. I was given the name of an attorney who would handle my case and was told to report to their office first thing after my release. I didn't understand why I'd see an attorney instead of a parole officer, but I was told the firm had organized my release. They would help me with my paperwork and explain my parole situation. I thanked Killer, and he reminded me about the cigarettes. I promised you they'd be there. To be honest, I don't know if he had anything to do with my early release, but it was worth a carton of cigarettes just to be free. As I walked out of the front gate, Amy was crying. I gave her a hug and a light kiss on the cheek. Welcome back, bro, she said. Amy and her husband greeted me warmly. I knew I was truly welcome there. Of course, I asked about Deb. Amy told me that after I spoke to her at the prison, Deb contacted a lawyer and signed the final divorce papers. I guess my suspicions about Deb were right, but now I was a free man. I knew I had to go see Deb to arrange visitation with my kids. I called first to make sure she was home. I didn't want any surprises that could land me back in prison. I explained that I wasn't coming over to cause trouble. We could even talk on the front porch. I just wanted to make arrangements to see my kids regularly. She agreed but warned she'd call the police if I started any trouble. When I arrived at the house, my kids ran up to me, shouting, "Daddy, Dad, Daddy, you're back." I hugged them tightly. God, how I missed them. I talked to them for a few minutes and told them to ride their bikes while Mommy and I sat on the porch. "What do you want?" Ray, Dev asked. You've made it perfectly clear we'll never be a family again. We're moving on with our lives, she said. Devi, they're my kids too, and I want to be part of their lives. I was ready to forgive you, but you lied to me again. You just had to go back to Bob and Sandy. I know what kind of people they are, the crowd they hang with. You were in prison, and I got lonely. Don't give me that. I know you've been with other people. I don't care anymore. You can do whatever you want with Bob, but if I find out my kids are exposed to any unhealthy situations, I will do everything in my power to take them from you. Do you understand me? This isn't an empty threat. My kids mean everything to me, and I want them to have a good life. Rai, I would never do anything to hurt our kids. You already have. You broke up our family because of Bob. I'll be keeping an eye on things to make sure my kids are kept away from that crowd. I'm meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to find out what my rights are. I don't trust you anymore, and I don't believe you. You've shown me your true colors. I'm over you, but we have 2 kids to raise, and I'm going to make sure they're raised in a good environment. I promise you, Rai, I won't get involved in that lifestyle again. Yes, I tried it. I'll admit it, but it's not for me or my kids. You'll see I'm a changed woman. Devi said, I don't trust you, and reminded me, actions speak louder than words. I replied, my kids came up, and we talked about school and everything they'd been doing. I told them I was living with Aunt Amy, but would be finding a place closer, and that I'd be spending more time with them. After kissing and hugging them goodbye, I headed back to Amy's. The next morning, I went to the law firm that had represented me. It felt a little strange going there since I hadn't even talked to the lawyer who helped get me released early. I walked up to the receptionist and pulled out the card I had been given by the parole board. May I speak to Mr. A.J. Brady, please? I have an appointment. I'm Ray Harper. The receptionist smiled. Miss Brady will see you shortly. Please take a seat, Mr. Harper. I paused. Did she say Miss Brady? The card said A.J. Brady, so I assumed it was a man. While I sat there, wondering, a beautiful woman in a navy blue dress suit approached. She smiled, revealing dimples, and her dark shoulder-length hair framed her face perfectly. I couldn't help but stare as she extended her hand. Ray Harper, I presume, she said, offering a handshake. I'm A.J. Brady. I know we haven't met, but I was asked to review your case. You didn't have a fair defense, and we'll discuss the rest shortly. Would you please follow me to my office? Mary, I don't want to be disturbed. Please take messages on any calls I get and tell them I'll get back to them, Miss Brady said to the receptionist. As we walked away, I followed her into her office. Honestly, I would have followed her just about anywhere. At that moment, she was strikingly attractive. Well, Mr. Harper, we finally meet, she said as we sat down. Please call me Angie if you don't mind. I owe you my life, and I have no idea why you did it. A good friend of mine asked me to look into your case. Your previous lawyer let you plead guilty without helping you. There were many mitigating circumstances he never mentioned, like the fact that you had just signed your divorce papers, and the man who played a role in your divorce showed up where you were. You weren't in the best state of mind. These factors could have reduced your sentence. Yes, you were involved in the incident, but your sentence was too harsh. I pointed this out to the parole board, and they somewhat agreed with me. Why, Miss Brady? Why me? Who asked you to help me? And can I call you something else besides Miss Brady? After all, you saved my life. I was asked to help, and I did. Is it really important for you to know who hired me? As for my name, you can call me AJ. I made friends with someone in prison. I said they called him Killer. He told me he would help get me an early release. He also mentioned that he had a daughter he loved named Angie, who was a lawyer. I couldn't help wondering, was he talking about you? Her eyes softened. Yes, Killer. Well, Dave. My father's name is Dave, and yes, he asked me to look into your case. He's never asked me to do that before, so he must have really liked you. I was surprised, but I would do anything for my father. "Can I call you Angie?" I asked. "I know we just met, and you're my lawyer, but AJ doesn't seem right for someone as beautiful as you. I definitely don't want to call you Miss Brady." "What does AJ stand for, anyway?" "Angelina. You need a Brady," she replied with a smile. "Now you know why I chose AJ. Look, Rye, we have a few things to discuss. How about we continue over lunch? I'd love to have lunch with you, but this isn't a date. I've got to work in a few hours, and I need to eat. So if you don't want to call it a date, you can pay for it and call it a business meeting. You do take clients to lunch sometimes, don't you?" Angie smiled, her dimples appearing again. "Yes, I do take clients to lunch, and I do eat after all. Let me tell you, Mary, we're leaving, and we'll go." I watched her as she got up. She was striking, not just in looks, but in personality, something rare to find in an attorney. We headed to a quiet restaurant. After we ordered, she explained what I could expect from my parole officer. She said he was decent, but reminded me to follow the rules and stay out of trouble. For the first few months, I'd meet with him twice a month, and after that, just once a month for the rest of the year. "And you know everything about me? Are you going to tell me anything about yourself, Angie?" "I don't think it would be appropriate to talk about my personal life with a client. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and I love it when you smile." "Please," she said, blushing slightly. "I told you I don't date clients, but thank you for the compliment. Tell me about your law degree. That's business, and as a client, I have the right to know." She smiled a little and tried not to laugh. "Okay, Ray. I received my law degree from the university on a scholarship. I've been an attorney for a few years now, specializing in criminal law." Our lunch arrived, and as we began eating, I couldn't help but think about Angie. "Will I see you again?" "Angie," she replied. "As a matter of fact, you need to come back next week to fill out some paperwork with your parole officer. We can have lunch again, then I'll even." I could see she was softening a bit. "Okay, but it's a lunch to discuss business only," she said with a smile. After lunch, we returned to the office. When she extended her hand to say goodbye, I took it in both of mine for a few seconds, wondering what she was thinking. I hoped she didn't see me as just another client. We said our goodbyes, and I told her I was already looking forward to our next lunch. Her receptionist glanced at her and smiled. It seemed that clients didn't often approach their lawyers like that. But then again, most lawyers didn't look like Angie. Returning to work felt great. It was like riding a bike. Just get back on and start riding. Most of the guys I used to work with were still there, and it felt like they had a newfound respect for me. No one messed with me. For the next 2 Mondays, I had appointments with Angie. She tried to keep it strictly business, but I wanted to know more about her. By the 4th week, she told me we were done with our business transactions. "Are you still my attorney?" I asked. "Of course. If you ever have a problem, all you need to do is call me," she said. "Angie, I'm afraid I have to fire you." Feeling conflicted, I said, "I'm so sorry." "Fire me. I helped you get out of prison and didn't charge you anything. And now you want to fire me?" "Yes," she said. "You said you wouldn't date clients, but I want a real date. I want to take you out for a proper dinner and maybe dancing. I'd like to really get to know you. I know I'm an ex-con and a factory worker, but I think you feel the same way because the last 3 weeks I could have phoned in the information you needed. I think you want to see me too. I'm sorry, I'm slightly attracted to you, but it's the ex-con and factory worker thing, isn't it? You don't think we should be together?" "No, that's not it at all. You're my client, and I'm your attorney. What will people think?" "Who cares? Just go out with me once. If you don't have a good time, you'll know not to go again. Follow your heart and go out with me on Saturday night. Look, I know I'm freshly out of prison, and I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to give it a chance. Oh God, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'll go once. I'm telling you right now, don't try to push for anything more," Angie replied, a bit flustered. We went out that Saturday. I borrowed my sister's car. I didn't want to take Angie out in my old truck. She had given me her address, which turned out to be a townhouse. When she answered the door, I was struck by how stunning she looked. We went to a fancy restaurant, ordered wine, and then had dinner afterward. While listening to the music, I asked her about herself. "Angie, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up? You must have been married since your last name is different from your dad's. You know my life is like a book, ready. My parents didn't get along well. Dad's been in prison for 14 years now. My brother, sister, and I were raised by our aunts and uncles. I was the youngest, just 14 when everything happened. It was really hard on us. My siblings haven't really forgiven Dad. They love him but can't forgive him. I knew Mom was cheating on him and told him about it. I confronted Mom, but she dismissed me, saying I was just a kid. 2 weeks later, Dad caught her with another man. I partly blame myself for what happened. Angie, you're not responsible for your mom's actions or your dad's incarceration. They were adults, and you were just trying to do the right thing. After Dad was incarcerated, I decided to go to college and become a lawyer. I hoped that could help my dad get a lighter sentence, which is why I chose criminal law. He was a brilliant lawyer himself and was proud of me, but there wasn't much I could do to help him. Were you married before, or is that none of my business? I asked both. I was married for a short time, and it's not really your business, she said with a smile. Can we talk about this another time? I don't want to bring a downer to this evening. I'm having a nice time with you. Would you like to dance? I have 2 left feet, but it will give me a chance to hold you, I suggested. We got up, and I asked the band to play a few slow songs in a row. I took Angie in my arms, holding her close as we swayed to the music. I could smell the pleasant scent of her hair. Ray, you should know that I don't date much because of the people I deal with. I have a considerable distrust of men. I'm just trying to be honest with you. If my dad hadn't sent you to me, I probably wouldn't be here tonight. I'm going to send your dad an extra carton of cigarettes. Angie, you're the nicest thing that's ever come my way. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. If I overstep my bounds, just tell me, and I'll pull back. When I took her home that night, I kissed her at the door. Afterwards, she just stared at me. Then she leaned in and kissed me again. Can I come in? No, Rai, it's too soon. Not tonight. Will you see me again? Say next Saturday. That might be a possibility. Call me around Thursday. I went home feeling very happy. We did go out the following Saturday and the Saturday after that. She began to share more about herself. I want you to know more about me. If we're going to keep seeing each other, I'm not going to hide anything from you. As I mentioned, I was married before. It was during my first year of college. We thought we loved each other and got married quickly. After I became pregnant, unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out. We were too young. I had a miscarriage, and we both realized we had made a mistake. We got divorced. I kept the last name Brady because my dad suggested it would distance me from my maiden name, Miller. I felt relieved that she was opening up to me. I told her that my kids wanted to meet her. My daughter kept asking to meet her. Angie, would you like to meet my sister? My 2 kids, we're having a family barbecue, and you're invited. It will be a week from Saturday. I knew this was a significant step for us. Angie was looking everywhere, but at me. I could tell she was considering how important this was. She took a deep breath, looked me in the eyes, and leaned in to kiss me. This was the first time she had initiated a kiss like this. Count me in. What do you want me to bring? I wasn't sure what to bring to a cookout, so I told her I would have Amy call her with details. When I told Amy about Angie coming to the cookout, the number of family members increased. Everyone wanted to meet the new woman in my life. My parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles were all coming. Angie said she would make potato salad. Amy mentioned how sweet Angie sounded on the phone, and I could tell she hoped something might develop between us. I visited Deb's house every other weekend to pick up my kids. I took them over to Amy's, or we went out somewhere. It was enjoyable being with them. I questioned them about their mother, but tried to do so gently. Deb told me that her new boyfriend was a school teacher named Pat who taught health and was a soccer coach. Initially, it bothered me, but Kayla mentioned that Pat's wife had passed away from leukemia 2 years ago, and he had moved here to start over. He had a 15-year-old daughter who got along well with Kyle and Kayla. I want to tell you, Deb, that your lying and cheating ruined our relationship. If you care for this man, treat him right and be honest with him. Don't mess it up like you did with us. Pat likes our kids and treats them well. He knows about me and understands that I'm their father. I hope it works out for you. I'm sorry for all the hurt I caused, Deb responded. You're a good man, Ray. I know you'll find the right woman. I'm just sorry for all the pain I caused. I said my goodbyes and drove home. I found a small apartment about a mile from where Deb and the kids live, with 2 bedrooms so they would have a place to stay when they were with me. I still visited Amy a couple of times a week, usually for meals but also to catch up. On the day of the barbecue, I was a bundle of nerves, waiting in the street for Angie to arrive. I felt a wave of relief when her car pulled up. She smiled at me and handed me a bowl of potato salad. You better eat some, she said with a smile. She looked beautiful. I didn't think she could look anything but stunning in my eyes. I felt so happy around her and knew I was falling in love with her, even though we hadn't done more than kiss. Some things you just know. I introduced Angie to everyone as a good friend of mine. When I introduced her to my mom and dad, she smiled and gave them a hug. My dad said right in front of her, "Don't let this one go, Ray. We already love her, and we don't even know her yet." Angie looked at me and smiled, which I took as positive feedback. When I introduced her to Amy, they both exchanged glances. I never told you, but I met your sister when I was interviewing people for your early release. I didn't mention it because the topic didn't come up until now. I had no idea we'd become friends. I told you I wouldn't lie to you, which is why I'm sharing this now. Amy and I haven't talked since the parole interview until she called me about the potato salad. Is there anyone else you talked to that I should know about? Angie asked. Yes, Deb, your ex-wife Sue and Bob. I also spoke with your boss to ensure you have a job, as well as the witnesses to the bar fight, and the police who arrested Ed. I did all this as your attorney. I had no idea I would end up developing feelings for you. I'm sorry for not disclosing all this earlier, but I wasn't supposed to share these details with you while you were my client. If you want me to leave, please tell me. No, I'm not asking you to leave. You just told me you were falling for me. And that's all I needed to hear. I pulled her close and kissed her, then put my arm around her and introduced her to the rest of the family. I told Angie I'd be back in a few minutes to get my kids, who were eager to meet her. When I returned, Kayla walked up to Angie and introduced herself. Hi, I'm Kayla. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? You're really pretty, just like Daddy said. Hello, Kayla. You can call me Angie or AJ. You're a very pretty girl yourself. It's so nice to meet you, Angie replied. Kayla said, come over and meet my big brother. He's shy and afraid of girls. Kyle, this is AJ, Daddy's friend. I watched as Kyle shook Angie's hand. She knelt down to talk to the kids at their level. It was clear they were going to get along well. I joined them, and Kyle said, we like her, Daddy. She's so pretty and nice. The barbecue was a success. Toward the end of the evening, Kyle and Kayla approached us. Dad, you know how you said we're going to the amusement park in 2 weeks. Can Angie come with us? That way, when Kayla and I are riding rides, you'll have someone to talk to. I tried to explain to Kyle that he should ask such questions in private, since Angie might have other plans or not like amusement parks. Kyle looked at Angie and apologized. I'm sorry, Angie. I didn't know you didn't like amusement parks. Angie laughed and said, what your dad means is that you should ask him questions like that in private. As for amusement parks, I love them, and would be happy to go if it's all right with your dad. Maybe you and I can ride the roller coaster together." We all went to the amusement park. The kids rode everything they could, and Angie kept her promise to Kyle by riding the roller coaster with him. She also rode the Ferris wheel with Kayla. On the way home, Kayla said to me, "Dad, you need to get a car instead of your truck. You can't expect Angie to use her car all the time, especially since we can't all fit in your truck." Both Angie and I laughed, but Kayla had a point. Over the next couple of weeks, I didn't get to see much of Angie as I had to work some weekends, and she was busy in court. We talked a few times on the phone, but it wasn't the same as being together. One Saturday, I picked up the kids and decided to take them to Chuck E. Cheese, a kid-friendly pizza place with games and prizes. Kayla asked if she could call Angie and invite her to join us. I didn't want to disappoint her, so I agreed to call Angie. "Hi, Angie, it's Ray." "Hi, Ray. I was planning to go out with a few friends." "Why?" "Kayla wanted to ask if you could come with us." "It's nothing urgent, just if you're available." "Okay, let me talk to Kayla." I could hear one side of the conversation, but Kayla said, "Hello, Angie. Dad is taking us to Chuck E. Cheese for pizza and games. We wanted to know if you'd like to come with us." "Sure, I'd love to join you. I miss you too. See you soon," Angie replied. After we returned from Chuck E. Cheese, where the kids won several stuffed animals thanks to Angie's game skills, I dropped them off at their mom's house. Angie told me it was time for us to get to know each other on a deeper level. We went to my apartment and sat on the couch. "Angie, you do know that I love you, don't you? I wouldn't be here right now if I felt otherwise. I want you to be gentle and caring with me. It's been a long time since I trusted any man. I don't want to be used. I want to feel loved." We began on the couch and gradually moved to the bedroom, where we explored each other's desires fully, from massages to playful moments with whipped cream. We spent the night in intimate connection, embracing and comforting each other. I felt most content holding her close. It had been so long since I experienced such closeness. When I woke up before her, I made French toast. Angie emerged from the bedroom wearing one of my t-shirts. I complimented her, and she looked radiant even in the morning. After a quick shower, we sat down to talk. "Angie, what's next for us?" I asked. "You know I love you, and my family loves you too. What do you envision for our future?" She smiled and said, "We've only known each other a few months, and we just shared such a special night. But I want you in my life every day. If you feel we haven't spent enough time together, we can continue as long as you'd like." I looked at her, hoping to take the next step. "Angie, I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me?" With tears in her eyes, Angie replied, "I don't take love lightly. I made a mistake once, but I am committed to you. Yes, I'll marry you. I promise to always be there for you and the kids, to be honest and faithful. I expect the same from you." As we embraced, Angie shared her feelings. "It's just that I think about my dad and how he would have been so happy for me. Many young girls dream of their wedding day with their father walking them down the aisle. I know that will never happen for me, and it makes me sad." I held her as she cried softly. She explained that her father had been unaware of her previous marriage, which ended in a miscarriage and divorce. "I'm sorry, Ray. I shouldn't dwell on that now. After all, I'm marrying a man my dad would have approved of, and whom I've loved since we first met." We decided to set a wedding date 2 months away. I shared the news with Amy and her husband, who were thrilled for us. I also called my kids to share the news, and they were overjoyed. When I visited Angie at her office, her receptionist, Mary, congratulated us and informed me that Angie had been spreading the word and inviting everyone to the wedding reception. As I entered Angie's office, I noticed she was tearful. I asked, "What's wrong?" She revealed that she had spoken with the prison warden about her father's situation. He was unable to leave prison, and his condition had worsened, with doctors giving him 3 to 6 months to live. Angie was devastated, and I held her close, feeling deeply for her. She reassured me. Dad's cancer isn't your fault. He's used cigarettes to barter with other prisoners, but you haven't contributed to his illness. I had an idea but didn't want to raise her hopes too high. I kissed her goodbye and promised to see her the next day. I took the day off work and went to the prison to see Killer and the warden. Killer, upon seeing me, asked me to take good care of Angie. I explained my plan to Killer, and after some initial hesitation, he agreed to cooperate if the warden approved. I assured him I would work on that. I had an appointment with the warden later that day. He greeted me warmly. "Ray, I see you're keeping your nose clean and planning a wedding. I'm sorry about Killer, but he's a lifer, and we can't let him out for his daughter's wedding. Warden, are you in charge of most decisions here? Can we use the chapel for the wedding with Killer escorting his daughter down the aisle?" I asked. The warden was surprised. "You want to get married in prison just so her dad can be there?" "Yes, sir. Angie hasn't seen her dad in over 14 years, and he's dying. All we ask is to use the chapel for the wedding. I know prisoners have been married here before." "All right, Ray," the warden said. "I'll set it up, but it can't be a large affair. You can only invite 3 outsiders besides you and your fiancé. Killer can invite a few fellow prisoners, and you'll have to use the prison minister." I thanked the warden and headed back to see Killer. "Killer," I said, "when you go to the bank, tell Angie to bring her birth certificate. The account is in her maiden name." I noted the information and told Dave I was sorry to hear about his illness. "Just take care of my little girl." He replied back at Angie's office. She noticed my smile. "What's up?" she asked. "Do you mind getting married in prison?" I asked. She was puzzled. "What are you talking about, Ray?" I explained the arrangement with the warden and how her father would be able to escort her down the aisle. Angie began to cry tears of joy. "God, I love you, Ray," she said. I then told her about the bank deposit box. We went to check it out at the bank. Angie provided her number and birth certificate, and we were shown to the safe deposit box. Inside was a note from her father. "Dear Angie, if you're opening this box, you are either getting married or I have passed on. I hope it's the former. This box contains your mother's wedding ring, which I saved for you. I want you to wear it proudly. Also, there are bonds totaling over $155,000 to help with your wedding. I set this up before I was sent away. When you see your brother and sister, let them know there is a box for each of them too. Yours is the only one with a ring. Congratulations, and always be honest with your husband. With love, Dad." Angie and I discussed our wedding and decided to invite her brother Brad and sister Lisa, as well as my sister Amy. We would have a reception shortly after the wedding. Angie and Amy spent the next month preparing for the reception, paying extra for everything due to the short notice. I wanted Angie to have as much of her dream wedding as possible. Amy offered to take photos with her digital camera. I went with Angie to visit her brother and sister. She introduced me to them and explained the wedding plans. They were moved to tears upon learning their father was dying, but agreed to attend the wedding. Angie gave them the numbers for their safe deposit boxes, and they were surprised that their father had set aside something for them on the wedding day. Angie and I drove to the prison together. Amy and her husband joined us, though he waited in the car. I rented a tuxedo for the occasion, while Amy helped Angie with her wedding dress, not wanting me to see her until she entered the chapel. I waited in the chapel where Brad was to be my best man, and Lisa my maid of honor. Amy played the piano, and a guard brought in 5 of Killer's friends. The warden entered with the minister and mentioned there would be cake and punch after the ceremony. After the ceremony, the music began playing "Here Comes the Bride," and everyone stood as Angie came through the door, escorted by her father, both with tears streaming down their faces. Angie had gotten her wish of being escorted by her father down the aisle on her wedding day. When we arrived in front of the chapel, everyone sat down except for our small wedding party. A guard closed the door, and the minister began. Who gives this woman to this man? I do, sir, Dave replied proudly, then took his seat. The minister continued, Angie Angelina W. Miller, do you take Raymond Michael Harper to be your husband? He then asked me the same question. We both affirmed our commitment to love and honor each other from this day forward. We were determined to make our marriage work despite our rocky pasts. After exchanging vows, I kissed Angie, and she turned to kiss and hug her father. We moved to an adjoining room for a few minutes to enjoy some cake and punch provided by the warden. Brad and Lisa approached their father for the first time in nearly 15 years. There were many tears, both of joy and remorse, as they expressed their enduring love for him. Amy took photos throughout the brief ceremony, capturing the emotional moments and the little bit of laughter that was shared. She then went to a 24-hour photo center to have the pictures developed and enlarged. After saying our goodbyes to Dave and the warden, we left the prison to head to our reception. At the reception, everyone we invited attended. Kyle and Kayla were the first to greet us, jumping up and down with excitement. Inside the hall, we were welcomed with shouts of joy. My parents were there with tears in their eyes, and many of Angie's friends were there to greet us. Mary, one of Angie's friends, came over to give us a hug. About half an hour later, Amy arrived with the photos she had taken. She had a couple of enlarged prints on display. Brad and Lisa had returned home to bring their families. Brad was with his wife and 2 kids, and Lisa with her husband and 3 kids. They showed their children a photo of Dave, explaining who he was. Angie had made 4 sets of photos, 1 each for Brad and Lisa, 1 for Angie and me, and 1 for Amy. Angie looked stunning in her wedding dress. She was so beautiful that she seemed like an angel sent to me. We danced, ate, and danced some more. Throughout the evening, with the clinking of glasses, we shared many intimate moments. My colleagues commented on how lucky I was, and I knew it was true. I had won the brass ring and intended to hold on to it forever. Debbie and Pat did not attend the wedding. This was Angie's special day, and I wanted nothing to spoil it. Watching Angie with her father, seeing her siblings reconnect, and witnessing the family coming back together made it a day I would never forget. It's been 6 months since our wedding. Debbie and Pat married last month, and I was pleased to see Debbie making an effort to build a new life. My kids told me that Pat treats them well. Aunt Sue and Uncle Bob have moved to another state, and I've managed to transfer to a shift that allows me to spend more time with my kids and be home with Angie every evening. Angie is pregnant with our child, and we learned that Dave Killer passed away 3 months after our wedding. His children visited him each month until this passing. It was sad, but we had the chance to tell him about Angie's pregnancy and that we were naming the baby David Raymond. It brought a smile to Dave's face. As I reflect on everything that has happened, my past struggles, meeting the woman of my dreams, and starting a family with her, I am grateful for the chance at happiness. There isn't a day that goes by when I don't thank God for what I have. I thank Him for giving Angie and me another chance at happiness.